The lie I told myself was that it was for the art, that the perfect shot was worth the risk. The truth, the one that gnawed at me even as I pushed deeper into the Nantahala National Forest, was that I was running from the quiet of my own life. The silence of an empty apartment was more deafening than any wilderness, so I sought the roar of the wild to drown it out. The park ranger, a woman with a face like worn leather and eyes that had seen too many foolish tourists, had pointed a thumb at the churning gray sky over the peaks. "That's a widowmaker brewing up there, son. The mountains don't give second chances." I'd thanked her for the advice and ignored it completely. Now, perched on a granite outcrop on what felt like the spine of the world, I knew I had been a fool. Below me, the valley was a tapestry of impossible autumn colors, fiery reds, molten golds, and defiant greens, all woven together under a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The air, which had been crisp and cool, was now heavy and charged, carrying the static of an impending war. My camera, a Nikon D850 that had cost me more than my first car, felt like a holy relic in my hands. I framed the shot, the ridgeline spearing the heart of the bruised clouds. This was it. The shot that would make the trip, the risk, the loneliness, all worthwhile. The first drop of rain was cold and fat, hitting my cheek like a dead man's finger. Then another and another. Within seconds, the sky didn't just open. It was torn asunder. The downpour wasn't rain. It was a vertical river. The wind followed, a physical presence that shrieked through the pines and tried to peel me from the rock. The temperature plummeted. One moment I was in a fall afternoon. The next, I was in the icy grip of a high-altitude winter. My perfect shot was gone, replaced by a gray, roaring chaos. The trail I'd so confidently followed up the ridge was now a muddy cascade, a treacherous slide of leaves and slick earth. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced my arrogant bubble. The ranger's words echoed in my head. No second chances. I scrambled to pack my camera, my fingers clumsy and numb. I swung my pack onto my shoulders and turned to retrace my steps, a futile effort against the liquid wall of the storm. My foot found a patch of moss-covered rock hiding beneath the slurry of mud. It was like stepping on ice. My feet went out from under me, and for a heart-stopping second I was airborne. I landed hard, my body screaming in protest, but the real damage came from a sickening, grinding pop in my left ankle. A white-hot electric pain shot up my leg, so intense it made me gasp. The world tilted, a dizzying whirl of green and gray. As I fell, the straps of my backpack, my lifeline, snagged on a jutting root. For a moment, it held. Then, with a soft, final thwip of tearing nylon, it gave way. I watched, helpless, as my world tumbled into the abyss. My camera, my GPS, my food, my dry clothes, all of it swallowed by the churning fog and the sheer drop. I was left with nothing but the clothes on my back, a shattered ankle, and the dawning, horrific realization of how profoundly I had screwed up. Pain and cold became my entire universe. I tried to stand, but the agony in my ankle was a physical barrier, a wall I couldn't push through. I was forced to crawl, dragging my useless leg behind me like an anchor. The rain was relentless, soaking through my jacket, my fleece, my skin, until it felt like it was chilling my very bones. Every rock was a razor, every branch a claw. The forest, which had been a place of beauty and solace, was now a hostile entity actively trying to kill me. As daylight bled from the sky, the true nature of my predicament settled in. I was miles from any road, injured with no gear and no shelter. The temperature was dropping into the 40s, and with the wind and the rain, My body was losing heat at an alarming rate. Shivering started, first as a tremor, then as a full-body convulsion I couldn't control. My teeth chattered so hard my jaw ached. This is how it happens, I thought. A strange, detached clarity cutting through the panic. This is how people die on the mountain. Not in a dramatic fall, but in a slow, cold, pathetic fade into oblivion. I found a small hollow beneath the gnarled, exposed roots of an ancient oak tree. It wasn't much, but it offered a meager break from the direct assault of the wind. I curled myself into the tightest ball I could manage, trying to conserve whatever warmth I had left. The shivering began to subside, a dangerous sign I dimly recognized as my body giving up. My thoughts grew sluggish, drifting away from the immediate horror and towards absurd, comforting images. I saw my small apartment, the worn armchair by the window, a steaming mug of coffee in my hands. I could almost feel the radiant heat from a fireplace that I didn't even own. The illusion was so powerful, so welcoming. My last coherent thought was not of art or adventure or regret. It was simply of warmth. A deep, primal yearning for a fire, for a blanket, for a home. My eyes fluttered closed. The roaring of the storm faded into a dull hum, and the world dissolved into a soft, inviting darkness. I was sinking into it, letting go, when a single point of light pierced the gloom. It bobbed and swayed, a small golden star in the black maelstrom. It grew closer, resolving into the gentle flickering glow of a lantern. A tall, dark figure held it, a silhouette against the storm. The light washed over me, and then there was nothing at all. I awoke to the smell of wood smoke and something else, something clean and herbal, like dried sage and pine needles. The world came back to me not in a rush, but as a slow, gentle tide. The first thing I registered was the weight. A heavy, coarse-spun quilt was tucked up to my chin, its sheer mass a comforting anchor. I was warm. Not just not cold, but deeply, thoroughly warm. A heat that seemed to seep into my bones and chase out the memory of the icy rain. I opened my eyes. The room was simple, built of thick, hand-hewn timbers. The spaces between them chinked with a pale gray mortar. The only light came from 2 oil lanterns, one on a small table beside my bed and another on a mantelpiece across the room. Their flames cast long, dancing shadows that made the corners of the room swim in darkness. There were no light switches, no outlets, no wires of any kind. I was lying on a cot with a rope-strung base and a straw-stuffed mattress that rustled when I moved. I tried to sit up and a dull, throbbing ache reminded me of my ankle. Looking down, I saw it was expertly wrapped in clean linen bandages over a thick, dark green poultice that smelled of crushed leaves. The swelling was down, the sharp, electric pain replaced by a manageable soreness. Whoever had done this knew what they were doing. The door creaked open, and the man from the storm stepped inside. He was tall, as I'd vaguely registered, but now I could see the details. He was perhaps in his late 50s, with a full gray-streaked beard that reached his chest, and a face carved with deep lines, like a map of a hard-lived life. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue, were sharp and missed nothing. He wore simple denim overalls over a flannel shirt, all of it worn but clean. He carried a wooden bowl that steamed, filling the room with the scent of a hearty vegetable stew. "Good to see you among the living," he said. His voice was a low rumble like stones grinding together at the bottom of a river. He set the bowl on the bedside table. "You were half frozen. Another hour out there and we'd have been saying a prayer over you." Where am I?" I managed, my own voice hoarse and unfamiliar. "You're in Havenwood. he replied, pulling a simple wooden stool to the bedside. "My name is Abner Croft. I am the elder here." He introduced himself with a simple finality, as if the name and title were all the explanation I would need. "I'm Ethan. Ethan Grant." "Ethan," he repeated, testing the name. He nodded slowly. "Eat. You need your strength back." I did as he said, spooning the hot, savory stew into my mouth. It was the best thing I had ever tasted. As I ate, I took in more of my surroundings. A rough-spun tunic and trousers were folded neatly on a chair. My own clothes, I noticed, were nowhere to be seen. They had likely been ruined beyond saving. Over the next few days, I saw more of Havenwood and its people. My initial assumption was that I'd stumbled upon some uncontacted sect, like the Amish or a splinter group of Mennonites. The community lived in a secluded valley, a pocket of the 19th century hidden in the folds of the Appalachians. They were a people of wood and iron, of soil and sweat. The men were broad-shouldered and bearded. The women wore long, simple dresses and covered their hair with bonnets or scarves. They spoke little, and when they did, their words were plain and direct, their accent a strange, archaic version of the local mountain dialect. They were not unfriendly, but they were reserved, watching me with a quiet, unnerving intensity. They moved with a purpose and a power that was startling. I watched two men lift a massive fallen oak log that would have required a crane back in my world. I saw a woman at the forge, her arms corded with muscle, hammering a glowing piece of iron into a perfect horseshoe with effortless rhythmic blows. They were all impossibly strong, impossibly vital. And their eyes. That was the most unsettling part. Every man, woman, and even the older children had the same piercing, almost feral gaze as Abner. When they looked at you, it felt less like they were seeing you and more like they were assessing you, weighing your strength, scenting your fear. It was the look of a predator, sharp and ancient, and it made the hair on my arms stand up. My healing was attended to by a woman named Elspeth, Abner's wife. She was a stern, quiet woman who moved with a silent grace. She never spoke more than a few words, but her hands were skilled. She would change my poultice daily, her fingers surprisingly gentle, and give me foul-tasting herbal teas that made me sweat and sleep deeply. My ankle healed at a pace that felt unnatural. A severe sprain, possibly a fracture that should have taken weeks to even bear weight on, was nearly mended in a matter of days. I felt like an alien, a creature from another time dropped into theirs. The rhythms of their life were dictated by the sun and the seasons. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer was their morning alarm, the lowing of cattle their evening lullaby. There was no electricity, no plumbing, no engines. They worked with tools I'd only seen in museums: crosscut saws, hand-cranked drills, horse-drawn plows. Yet they not only survived, they thrived. Their crops were healthy, their homes sturdy, their people robust. I was grateful, deeply so. They had saved my life, no question about it, but gratitude was a thin blanket over a growing sense of unease. I was a guest, but I felt like a curiosity in a cage. The valley was beautiful, a pristine wilderness untouched by the modern world, but it felt enclosed. The steep, tree-covered ridges that ringed the settlement seemed less like a picturesque backdrop and more like the bars of a prison. I was safe, I was healing, but I was also trapped. And every time I met the sharp, predatory gaze of one of the people of Havenwood, a cold knot of fear tightened in my stomach. I was in their world now, and I had no idea what the rules were. A week after my rescue, the morning air had a new, biting edge to it. The last of the autumn leaves had fallen. carpeting the valley floor in a brittle layer of rust and gold. My ankle was a ghost of an injury, a faint ache where blinding pain had once lived. I could walk on it with only the slightest limp, a recovery so swift it felt like a fever dream. Abner found me by the smokehouse, watching the thin gray wisps curl into the crystalline blue sky. He stood beside me for a long moment, his silence more profound than any conversation. "The leg is strong," he stated, not as a question, but as a fact. "Yes, thanks to you and Elspeth. I don't know how to repay you." He waved a dismissive hand, his gaze fixed on the northern ridge. "Your thanks is enough. But the first snows are not far off. Once they come, the passes will be closed until spring. It is time for you to leave." A jolt of relief, so potent it was almost dizzying, shot through me. I was getting out. I was going home. The unease that had been my constant companion for a week began to dissolve. "I understand," I said, trying to keep the eagerness out of my voice. "Just point me in the right direction." The town of Silva is a 2-day walk east of here. Stay by the creek bed until it joins the Tuckasegee River. From there you'll find the highway. He handed me a canvas pack, much simpler than my own, but sturdy and well made. Inside was a water skin, a loaf of dark, dense bread, a wedge of hard cheese, and a strip of smoked venison. He also gave me a set of clothes, thick wool trousers, a linen shirt, and a heavy deerskin jacket that smelled of wood smoke and tannin. They were the clothes of his people, strange and antiquated, but they were warm. "I can't take all this," I protested. "You will die without it," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "My sons, Caleb and Jonas, will walk with you to the edge of our lands. Beyond that, you are on your own." Caleb and Jonas were 2 young men, probably not much older than 20, but they had the same grim set to their jaws and the same unnerving, watchful eyes as their father. They were built like young bulls, all muscle and quiet confidence. They said nothing, simply nodding to me before setting off at a brisk, ground-eating pace. We walked for hours, climbing out of the sheltered valley and into the higher, more exposed forest. The trees grew sparser here, clinging to rocky slopes. The silence of my companions was absolute, broken only by the crunch of our boots on the dry leaves and the sigh of the wind through the bare branches. I tried to make small talk once or twice, but their one-word answers made it clear they weren't interested. They weren't my guides. They were my guards, escorting a foreign element to the border. We were nearing the top of the ridge, the point Abner had described as the valley's edge, when the sound came. It wasn't a roar or a cry. It was a shriek, a high-pitched, tearing sound that seemed to rip the very fabric of the air. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated malice, filled with a predatory hunger that bypassed the ears and drilled straight into the primal core of my brain. Every bird in the forest fell silent. The wind died. An absolute, terrifying stillness descended. Caleb and Jonas froze, their heads snapping up towards the sky. Their faces, usually so stoic, were now masks of grim fury. "They're early," Jonas hissed, his voice a low growl. "Go!" Caleb barked at me, shoving me forward. "Get over the ridge! Now!" But I was paralyzed, my eyes scanning the sky, trying to find the source of that soul-shaking sound. And then I saw them. Dark shapes detaching from the gray clouds, plummeting towards the valley below. At first I thought they were massive birds of prey, but they were wrong. Their movements were too sharp, too angular. As they drew closer, their forms became horribly clear. They were like gargoyles torn from a medieval cathedral and given malevolent life. Their bodies were lean and skeletal, covered in a dark, leathery hide that looked as tough as stone. Bat-like wings, ribbed with bone, beat the air with powerful, silent strokes. Their heads were elongated and reptilian, with mouths full of needle-sharp teeth. But their most terrifying features were their limbs, which ended not in claws, but in long, curving talons of a black, obsidian-like material, honed to a razor's edge. I watched in stupefied horror as they descended on Havenwood. And then, from the valley floor, an answer came, a chorus of deep, guttural roars that shook the very ground I stood on. The sound of pure, untamed rage. Before I could process what was happening, the transformation began beside me. I turned to look at Caleb and Jonas, and my world dissolved into a nightmare. A strangled gasp escaped Jonas as his spine arched backward with a series of sickening, wet cracks. His bones were breaking, rearranging themselves under his skin. His limbs elongated, his clothes tearing as his muscles swelled and bunched into new, inhuman shapes. Coarse, dark fur erupted from his skin, covering him in seconds. His face pushed forward into a snarling muzzle, his teeth lengthening into vicious fangs. His placid human eyes burned with a new golden fire. In the space of 10 heartbeats, the quiet young man was gone, replaced by a monster, a 9-foot-tall bipedal wolf of muscle and fury. Caleb was right behind him, his own transformation just as swift, just as brutal. I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. Werewolves. They were real. The stories, the legends, all of it. The creatures, the gargoyles were real, and the people of Havenwood were their ancient enemies. The 2 wolfmen let out roars that echoed the chorus from the valley and charged back down the trail, disappearing into the trees, leaving me alone and shaking. My survival instinct finally kicked in, screaming at me to run. I turned and scrambled up the last few feet of the ridge, my only thought to get away, to put as much distance as possible between me and this impossible savage war. But I wasn't fast enough. A shadow fell over me. I heard the whistle of air slicing through wings and looked up into the soulless black eyes of one of the creatures. It had peeled off from the main attack, perhaps drawn by the scent of my terror. It dove, silent as death. I threw my arms up in a useless gesture of defense. There was no impact, no tearing of flesh, just a single searing point of pain in my side. It was a cold fire, a feeling of being pierced by an icicle heated in a forge. I looked down and saw the creature's wicked talon embedded in my torso, just below my ribs. It had slicked through my deerskin jacket and my flesh as if they were made of paper. The creature let out another of its piercing shrieks, this one triumphant, and pulled its talon free. The world swam, my vision tunneling into a pinpoint of gray. The pain was immense, a white-hot agony that consumed everything. I fell to my knees, clutching the wound, my hand coming away slick with warm, dark blood. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the creature banking in the sky, turning to rejoin the fray in the valley below. The world was a haze of pain and the smell of wet earth. I lay on my side, the life pouring out of me in a hot, rhythmic tide that matched the frantic, failing beat of my heart. Each breath was a shallow, ragged gasp that sent a fresh wave of agony through my side. The forest floor was cold, but a deeper, more profound cold was spreading from my core, a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. It was the cold of encroaching death. Through the graying curtain of my vision, a figure knelt beside me. It was Abner. The sounds of the battle below, the unholy shrieks and the bestial roars, were already fading, distant, and unimportant. Abner's face was grim, his beard matted with sweat, and something dark that I knew was not his own blood. He was back in his human form, but the ferocity of the beast still lingered in his pale blue eyes. He placed a calloused hand on my chest, then glanced at the wound in my side. His expression was devoid of pity. It was the look of a man making a hard calculation. "The talon was poisoned," he said, his voice low and steady amidst the chaos. "It is not of this world. It dissolves the flesh, turns the blood to ash. You are dying." He wasn't being cruel. He was stating a fact. I could feel it. The spreading numbness, the way the edges of the world were fraying and dissolving. "There is nothing I can do to heal this," he continued, his gaze locking with mine, holding me steady as my consciousness threatened to slip away. "Your life is over, but I can offer you another one." I tried to speak, but only a wet, gurgling sound came out. "I can stop the poison. I can knit your flesh back together. I can give you a strength you have never known," he said, his voice dropping to an intense, almost hypnotic whisper. "But this gift is not given freely. It will bind you to us, to this valley. It will chain you to the moon. You will never be the man you were. The gift of life will carry a curse. Choose." The choice was no choice at all. In that moment, faced with the absolute terrifying finality of oblivion, there was nothing I would not have done for one more breath. The life I had been so desperate to return to, my quiet apartment, my lonely passion for photography, it all seemed like a faded photograph of a stranger's existence. All that mattered was the raw, desperate need to be. I couldn't speak, so I nodded, a jerky, spastic movement of my head. It was enough. A flicker of something, not satisfaction, but a grim resolve, passed through Abner's eyes. He leaned over me, his face close to mine. He began to speak, and the words were not English. It was a language of rock and wind, of blood and bone, a string of harsh, guttural sounds that vibrated in the air around us. As he spoke, I felt a strange pressure build in the forest, as if the ancient trees themselves were listening, bearing witness. Then he lowered his head to my shoulder. I braced for a sting, a prick, but it was nothing like that. It was a tearing, a brutal violation as his teeth, no longer human, sank deep into my flesh. The pain was blinding, a supernova of agony that eclipsed the dying fire in my side. It was not a bite, it was a branding, a searing of my very soul with a mark I could never remove. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound, and the last of my strength gave out. The world shattered into a million points of light, and then went utterly, completely black. I woke up in the same rope-strung bed, under the same heavy quilt. For a confused moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare. The creatures, the transformation, the bite. I sat up, my body moving with a fluid ease that felt alien. There was no dizziness, no weakness. I looked down at my side, pulling up the simple linen shirt they had put on me. There was no wound, where the creature's talon had pierced me. Where I had felt my life bleeding out onto the forest floor, there was only a pale, silvery scar, thin as a spider's thread. I ran my fingers over it. The skin was smooth, whole. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and stood. I was not just healed, I was renewed. I felt a vibrant, thrumming energy coursing through me, a sense of power that was both exhilarating and terrifying. My senses were on fire. I could hear the tiny scuttling of a mouse in the wall. I could smell the distinct scents of the different herbs drying in the next room. I could see the intricate grain in the wooden beams of the ceiling with a crystalline clarity I'd never known. The world had been a blurry photograph. Now it was in razor-sharp focus. The door opened and Abner entered. He looked older, wearier than before. There was a fresh, deep scratch running down his forearm. He carried no food this time, only the weight of the truth. "You feel it then," he said, his eyes appraising me. "The change. What did you do to me?" "I did what you asked. I saved your life." He sat on the stool, the wood groaning under his weight. "The poison is gone. The wound is closed. But my blood now runs in your veins. The spirit of the wolf is now bound to your spirit." He then told me everything. His people were not a religious sect. They were a pack, a clan of werewolves whose lineage traced back centuries to the Black Forest of Germany. They were the descendants of a family cursed or blessed, depending on your view, with lycanthropy. Their ancestors had fled persecution, coming to the New World seeking refuge, and had found this isolated valley, a place where they could live in peace. But the gift, as he called it, came with a heavy price. An ancient magic, woven into their very blood, tied them to this specific piece of land. The valley was their sanctuary, but also their prison. "If any of us leave," Abner said, his voice heavy with the weight of generations, "if we stray for more than a few days from the soil of this valley, a sickness takes hold. Our bodies begin to decay, to rot while we still draw breath. We are bound to this place, to these mountains. And now, Ethan Grant, so are you." The exhilarating sense of power vanished, replaced by a cold, crushing despair. I wasn't a guest anymore. I wasn't a survivor. I was an inmate. He had saved my life only to steal it. "Forever," I whispered, the word tasting like ash. Abner nodded, his face a stone mask of grim acceptance. "Forever. You are one of us now. You are Havenwood." The shock was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. Forever. The word echoed in the silent spaces of my mind, a death knell for the life I once knew. I was a prisoner, bound by blood and magic to this forgotten patch of woods in the heart of the Appalachians. Despair was a lead weight in my gut, so heavy I felt I might collapse under it. I stared at my hands, turning them over and over. They looked the same, but they weren't. They were the hands of a monster, the hands of a captive. I looked up at Abner, a torrent of questions battling for release. Those things, the flying creatures, what were they? Abner's gaze drifted towards the small, single-paned window, as if he could see the monsters still lingering in the sky. "We call them the Shriekers, for the sound they make before they attack. We do not know what they are truly. They have plagued this valley for generations, but their attacks have always been rare. Sporadic. A test of our borders. Nothing like yesterday. That was a coordinated assault. An act of war. But who controls them?" I pressed, the photographer in me, the seeker of answers overriding the fear. "They can't be just wild animals." He was silent for a long time, stroking his thick beard. "For a century," he began, his voice low, "we have shared this valley with another clan. They keep to the far western end, a place of shadow and cold stone. We have a pact, an agreement of non-interference forged in blood long ago. We do not cross into their territory. They do not cross into ours. But these creatures, they have the stink of old magic about them. The kind of blood sorcery they favor. Who are they?" "Vampires," he said, the word falling into the quiet room with the weight of a gravestone. "The Devereaux clan. They live in a castle built into the heart of Blackfang Peak, Blackspire Keep. Vampires and werewolves, sharing a valley." It sounded like the plot of a terrible B-movie. Yet the memory of Caleb and Jonas transforming of the shrieker's talon in my side, was undeniable proof. This was my new, insane reality. You think they broke the pact? That they sent those things? It is the only explanation that makes sense, Abner grumbled. They seek to drive us out, to claim the entire valley for themselves. The pact is broken. I must go to them. I must have answers. He rose from the stool, his decision made. The weariness had fallen away from him, replaced by the grim authority of a wartime leader. A sudden fierce impulse seized me. I was no longer just a lost photographer. I was part of this, whether I liked it or not. The poison from that creature had nearly killed me. The bite from Abner had changed me forever. I had a stake in this. More than that, I had a unique perspective. I'm coming with you, I said, my voice firmer than I expected. Abner turned, one eyebrow raised. This is not your concern, boy. That thing wounded me, I countered, pointing to the faint scar on my side. I saw it up close. I know what it looked like, how it moved. I saw them as a man, not as one of you. That's a perspective you don't have. And you made me one of you. That makes it my concern. He studied me, his pale eyes seeming to strip away my defenses, weighing my resolve. I met his gaze without flinching. For the first time since arriving in Havenwood, I wasn't just a frightened victim. I was something else, something new. Finally, he gave a slow, reluctant nod. Very well. You will come, but you will speak only when spoken to. Mara will join us. Mara was a woman I had seen working the tanning racks, her face stern and framed by braids of dark hair shot through with silver. She was as silent as the stones of the mountain, but when she moved, it was with the coiled, efficient grace of a predator. She met us at the edge of the village, armed with a heavy wood axe and a long, sharp hunting knife. She gave me a single, assessing glance, and then looked to Abner, awaiting orders. She was a soldier, and he was her commander. We set off, a delegation of 3, heading west into a part of the forest I had not yet seen. The woods here were different. The friendly oaks and maples of the eastern valley gave way to ancient, towering hemlocks and dark pines that crowded together, blocking out the sun. A perpetual twilight clung to the forest floor, and a damp, earthy smell of decay hung in the air. My new senses were a constant, overwhelming symphony of information. I could smell the rot in a fallen log 50 yards away, hear the frantic heartbeat of a rabbit hiding in a thicket, and see the individual needles on the highest pine branches against the sliver of gray sky. The world was alive in a way I had never imagined. It was a dizzying, intoxicating experience. I felt more a part of this wild place than I ever had behind the lens of my camera. After a few hours of walking through the oppressive gloom, the trees began to thin. We emerged onto a rocky promontory, and I saw it. Black Spire Keep. It wasn't a fairy tale castle. It was a jagged, cruel-looking fortress that seemed to have been clawed out of the black rock of the mountain itself. Sharp, unnatural spires reached for the sky like skeletal fingers. No lights shone from the narrow, arrow-slit windows. It was a place of profound silence and ancient menace, a black tooth in the gums of the mountain. A narrow, winding path, barely wide enough for one person, led up to a massive gate of dark, iron-banded wood. As we approached, the gate swung inward with a low groan that echoed across the stone. There was no one there to open it. It simply opened for us. We stepped into a courtyard of cold, gray flagstones. And there, waiting for us, was the welcoming party. There were 5 of them. They wore clothes that belonged to another century. Men in high-collared velvet jackets, women in long, elegant gowns of silk and lace. Their faces were uniformly pale and beautiful, with an ageless, aristocratic perfection. They stood unnaturally still, their features as immobile as porcelain dolls. The contrast between them and us, Abner, Mara, and me in our simple, rustic clothes, was jarring. We were creatures of the earth, of wood and muscle. They were creatures of shadow, of silk and stone. One of them, a man with long silver hair tied back with a black ribbon, stepped forward. His lips, the color of a fresh bruise, curled into a faint, mocking smile. "Abner Croft," he said, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that held no warmth at all. "We have been expecting you." The air in the courtyard was thick with a tension so palpable it felt like a physical pressure against my skin. It was the ancient, instinctual animosity of wolf versus viper, a silence layered with 1,000 years of unspoken threats. The vampire stood with an unnerving, predatory stillness, while Abner and Mara radiated a coiled energy, like a spring tightened to its breaking point. From the great hall of the keep, another figure emerged, moving with a liquid grace that made the others seem clumsy. He was tall and impossibly elegant, dressed in a tailored black coat that fell to his knees. His hair was the color of a raven's wing, and his face was a masterpiece of cold, classical beauty. But his eyes were the most arresting feature. They were dark and ancient, filled with the weary intelligence of one who has witnessed empires rise and fall. This had to be their leader. "Abner," the vampire said, his voice as smooth and cold as polished marble. "It has been a long time. To what do we owe this rustic intrusion?" "Save your pleasantries, Julian," Abner snarled, his voice a low growl that vibrated in my chest. "Your beasts attacked my people. Women and children were forced to take shelter while my men fought and bled. The pact is broken." Julian Devereaux raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. A flicker of something, surprise, annoyance, crossed his ageless features. "My beasts?" he repeated, a note of dangerous silkiness in his tone. "I assure you, old wolf, if I were to send my beasts into your woods, you would have known it. The attack would not have stopped until your precious hovel was reduced to splinters and ash." The insult hung in the air, a naked challenge. Mara's hand tightened on the handle of her axe. "Then explain the shriekers," Abner demanded. "They came from the west." "From your lands." Julian's cold demeanor shifted. He turned his head and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to the silver-haired vampire, who bowed stiffly in return. "The creatures you speak of are not ours," Julian said, his voice losing its mocking edge and taking on a harder, colder tone. "But we are familiar with them. 2 nights ago, a patrol of my own fledglings was ambushed near the western ridge. They were torn apart. We lost 3. Their remains were difficult to piece together." The revelation hit with the force of a physical blow. Abner's rigid posture slackened for a fraction of a second. He had been so certain, so ready for a confrontation with a known enemy. This new information changed everything. It meant they were both being attacked. It meant there was a third player in this deadly game. "Who?" Abner asked, the single word raw and stripped of its earlier aggression. "That is the question we have been asking ourselves," Julian replied. He gestured towards the massive doors of the keep. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more civilized. It seems we have a mutual problem." The negotiations took place in a vast, cold hall that felt more like a mausoleum than a room. A long, dark wood table dominated the space, but we did not sit. We stood, the 2 factions facing each other across the polished expanse, a chasm of mistrust between us. The air was heavy with the scent of dust, old stone, and something faintly cloying like dried roses. The conversation was tense and fraught with a century of bad blood. Abner and Julian were like two old predators, circling each other, testing for weakness, each word a carefully calculated move. They traded information about the attacks, the number of creatures, their tactics, the strange, venomous quality of their talons. It became terrifyingly clear that both clans were facing a threat they did not understand, an enemy whose motives were a complete mystery. "They are not natural creatures," Julian mused, his long, pale fingers tracing the rim of a crystal goblet filled with a liquid the color of dark wine. "They are constructs. Something made, not born." "Made by who?" Mara spoke for the first time, her voice surprisingly soft but laced with steel. Julian's dark eyes settled on her. "Someone with a deep understanding of the old ways? Blood alchemy, flesh shaping. A magic as ancient as our own bloodlines, an alliance. The idea was unthinkable, a violation of generations of ingrained hostility. But survival was a powerful motivator. A vampire could be reasoned with. An unknown, monstrous enemy could not. "We must find the source," Abner said, his voice heavy with resignation. "We must find the nest." "My thoughts exactly," Julian agreed. A joint excursion. A small, fast-moving party to track the creatures and locate their master. He looked over his people, his gaze lingering on two of them. "Seraphina will go. Her blades have tasted the flesh of these things. And Oliver, your speed will be an asset." Seraphina was a woman with fiery red hair and eyes the color of emeralds. She was clad not in a gown, but in a practical dark leather tunic and trousers. Tucked into sashes on her back were the hilts of two short, curved swords that looked lethally sharp. She met my gaze with an expression of pure, predatory confidence. Oliver was younger, his face locked in a petulant, arrogant scowl. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, his impatience a palpable force. Julian's gaze then fell on me. "And who is this?" he asked, his voice laced with a cold curiosity. "He smells of both worlds, of the wolf and of fresh death." "A new pup in your litter, Abner." "His name is Ethan," Abner said flatly. "The Shriekers wounded him. He is the reason we know of the poison. He has seen them as a man sees, not just as a beast. He will go, along with Mara." And just like that, it was decided. An alliance of convenience, a truce born of desperation. Our small, monstrous fellowship was formed. 2 werewolves, 1 newly turned, and 1 a seasoned warrior, and 2 vampires, a graceful killer and an arrogant youth. We were to be the first line of defense for a valley that was home to 2 ancient enemies, now united against a common, faceless terror. I looked from the cold, beautiful faces of the vampires to the rugged, fierce expressions of my own kind. We were a collection of nightmares, a party of monsters, and we were the valley's only hope. There were no handshakes, no solemn vows. The alliance was sealed with a curt nod between Abner and Julian, and our mission began immediately. There was no time to waste. We left the cold silence of Blackspire Keep as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in bloody shades of orange and purple. The encroaching twilight was a comfort to the vampires, whose senses sharpened in the gloom. For me, it was just another layer of menace in a world that had become entirely menacing. Seraphina led the way. She moved with a dancer's grace, her steps completely silent on the carpet of dead leaves and pine needles. Her senses were as keen as my own, but different. Where I heard the rustle of a shrew under a log, she seemed to feel the vibrations in the earth. Where I smelled the damp soil, She seemed to taste the metallic tang of old blood in the air. "This way," she murmured, her voice a low hush. "The scent of their kill is stale, but it lingers." She led us west, up a steep winding game trail towards the jagged ridgeline that formed the valley's outer wall. The air grew thinner and colder. This was the site of the vampire patrol's demise. The evidence was scant. A few patches of churned earth, the scent of vampire ash on the wind. But the sense of violence that permeated the area was undeniable. Oliver, the younger vampire, was chafing under Serafina's command. "There is nothing here," he hissed, his voice full of aristocratic disdain. "The trail is cold. We are wasting time." "Patience, little bat," Mara grunted from behind me, her hand resting on her axe. "The hunt requires it." Oliver shot her a venomous glare but fell silent. My own senses were on fire. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming, but I was learning to filter it, to focus. I closed my eyes, concentrating on smell, pushing past the dominant sense of pine and rock and decay, and then I caught it. A foul, unnatural odor clinging to the rocks. It was the smell of a slaughterhouse mixed with something chemical and wrong, a stench of sickness and rot that made my stomach turn. "Over there," I said, pointing towards a narrow fissure in the rock face. "The smell is stronger there." Serafina nodded, her green eyes glinting with approval. "The wolf's nose is sharp." We followed the fissure as it widened into a small, secluded clearing, a natural amphitheater of gray stone. In the center of the clearing, it stood waiting for us. It was a monstrosity, a blasphemy against nature. It was huge, easily 12 feet long, a grotesque patchwork of different animals stitched together into a single horrific form. It had the massive, shaggy torso and powerful forelimbs of a black bear, the sleek, muscular hindquarters of a mountain lion, and a long, serpentine tail that ended in a cluster of bony spikes. But there were other parts, too. The antlers of a stag jutting from one side of its head, an extra pair of canine legs grafted crudely to its side. Twitching and useless, its head was a nightmare collage of bear and cat, with mismatched eyes that burned with a dull, malevolent light. A thick, viscous drool dripped from its jaws, sizzling where it hit the ground. This was a chimera, a creature dragged from the darkest pages of mythology and given flesh. With a gurgling roar that was a sickening fusion of a bear's bellow and a cougar's scream, it charged. Everything happened at once. Oliver, in a flash of arrogant bravado, shot forward, a blur of motion. The chimera swiped with a clawed paw, a blow that should have torn him in half. He dodged, but not fast enough. The claws raked across his back, sending him tumbling through the air. At the sight of the monster, at the scent of blood, something primal and white-hot exploded in my mind. It was an instinct, a rage that was not my own. My body contorted, bones cracking and reshaping with a surge of agonizing, ecstatic power. The world blurred, and when it came back into focus, I was looking out from a much greater height. I was the wolf, but this time was different. A sliver of me, of Ethan, was still there, trapped inside the beast's skull, a terrified passenger in a body fueled by pure, unrestrained fury. I let out a roar that answered the chimeras and charged. Mara was right beside me, a dark whirlwind of fur and fang. We hit the creature's flank like a battering ram, our combined weight staggering it. I sank my fangs into its thick, matted hide, tasting hot, foul blood. At the same time, Serafina became a specter of death. With a soft whisper of displaced air, leathery wings erupted from her back, and she launched herself into the air. She moved with impossible speed, a crimson-haired blur, her twin blades flashing in the twilight. She dove and weaved around the lumbering beast, her swords leaving a dozen shallow, bleeding cuts in their wake, harassing it, distracting it. The chimera thrashed, its powerful limbs flailing. It threw Mara off, sending her crashing into the rock wall. It tried to bite me, its mismatched jaws snapping inches from my face. The human part of me screamed in terror, but the wolf only snarled in defiance. Oliver, recovering from the first blow, his wounds already starting to close, rejoined the fight. He used his speed, darting in and out, a distracting gnat that the chimera couldn't seem to track. We were a chaotic but effective unit. The wolves provided the brute force, the vampires the speed and precision. The chimera, powerful as it was, couldn't defend against all of us at once. I saw an opening. As it reared up to slash at the airborne Seraphina, I lunged, my powerful jaws clamping down on the back of its thick neck. I bit down, putting all my new monstrous strength into the attack. There was a sickening crunch of bone and cartilage. The beast shuddered, a long, wet sigh escaping its lungs, and then it crashed to the ground, lifeless. The battle lust receded, leaving me panting, my fur matted with black, stinking blood. The painful shift back to my human form felt like being turned inside out. I collapsed to my knees, shaking and nauseous. Seraphina landed silently beside the corpse, wiping her blades clean on its hide. "A crude creation," she said, her voice clinical, but effective. She knelt, examining the body with an expert's eye. Her fingers probed a thick, crudely stitched seam where the bear's flesh met the lion's. "It would seem our creator is not only a sorcerer, but a surgeon of sorts." She peeled back a flap of skin, revealing the muscle beneath. And there, seared into the tissue, was a brand. It was an intricate symbol, a serpent devouring its own tail but coiled around an alchemical retort. "I know this mark," she whispered, her voice tight with a cold fury I had not heard before. "It belongs to Lucian Varick, a brilliant alchemist from our clan. He was obsessed with transcending the limits of our nature, with improving upon a perfect design. He was declared a heretic and banished 5 years ago. We thought he had fled the continent." "Apparently not," Mara growled, nursing a bruised shoulder. "We finally had a name for our enemy, Lucien, a mad heretical vampire alchemist. And he was here, in this valley, building an army of monsters. The trail of Lucien Varick was not hard to follow. The chimera had left a wake of crushed foliage and a lingering, foul scent that even I, in my human form, could now faintly detect. For my werewolf and vampire companions, it was as clear as a paved road. The tracks led us away from the high ridges and down into the darkest, most ancient part of the valley, a maze of deep ravines and shadowed gorges where the sun never reached. We entered a narrow canyon, a deep scar in the earth. The rock walls, slick with moss and constant dampness, rose hundreds of feet on either side, nearly touching at the top, leaving only a thin gray ribbon of sky visible. The temperature dropped, and the air grew still and heavy. Every sound we made, the crunch of a boot on gravel, the clink of a loose stone, echoed unnaturally, creating a disorienting cacophony. It was a claustrophobic, oppressive place, a natural tomb. "This is a perfect place for an ambush," Seraphina murmured, her twin blades already in her hands. Her voice, barely a whisper, seemed to bounce off the walls around us. "Let them come," Oliver sneered, a feral grin on his face. He seemed to relish the prospect of a fight, his earlier arrogance replaced by a raw bloodlust. Mara said nothing, but her eyes, constantly scanning the cliffs above, told me she agreed with Seraphina. I felt it too. A prickling sensation on the back of my neck. The feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. My enhanced hearing was a curse in here. The endless echoes were a constant distraction. But beneath them, I could hear something else. A faint, dry, scraping sound. Like claws on stone. "Above us," I hissed. It was the only warning we got. That soul-tearing shriek, amplified and distorted by the canyon's acoustics, erupted from all sides. From the shadows and crevices high up on the canyon walls, the shriekers emerged. There were at least a dozen of them, crawling down the sheer rock faces like monstrous insects before launching themselves into the narrow airspace between the walls. The space was too tight for them to dive on us as they had before. It became a chaotic, three-dimensional battle. One of them swooped towards me, its obsidian talons extended. I threw myself to the side, rolling behind a boulder as its claws gouged deep furrows in the rock where I had been standing. Mara roared and transformed. In seconds, the towering wolf woman was there, a whirlwind of fury. She couldn't climb the sheer walls, but she became our anchor, our defense on the ground. She met the swooping creatures head-on, her powerful arms and claws batting them out of the air like grotesque flies. Seraphina and Oliver took to the sky. Their leathery wings unfurled, and they launched themselves upwards, meeting the enemy in their own element. It was a terrifying, beautiful sight. They were dervishes of violence, their preternatural speed and grace, allowing them to weave and dodge in the confined space. Seraphina's blades were a blur, slicing through leathery wings and skeletal limbs. Oliver, for all his arrogance, was a brutally effective fighter. His attacks like a striking cobra, fast, direct, and vicious. That left me. I was trapped between the ground war and the air war. I was no match for Mara's brute strength in my human form, and I couldn't fly. But as a shrieker peeled away from Mara and came for me again, I saw a new path. I channeled the wolf's power not to fully transform, but to augment my human body. A surge of strength flooded my limbs. My fingers seemed to lengthen, my nails hardening. I leaped towards the canyon wall, my hands and feet finding impossible holds in the sheer rock. The beast within me knew how to do this. I scrambled up the wall, moving with a speed and agility that was not my own. The shrieker, surprised, tried to follow, its claws scraping for purchase. I got above it, and then with a surge of adrenaline, I jumped, landing on its back. The creature shrieked, thrashing wildly, trying to dislodge me. I held on, my legs wrapped around its skeletal torso. I drew the hunting knife Abner had given me and drove it down with all my strength into the spot where its neck met its shoulders. The blade sank deep. The creature went rigid, and then we were falling. We hit the canyon floor with a sickening crunch. I rolled free, bruised and battered, as the monster lay twitching, its lifeblood seeping into the gravel. The battle was short but vicious. Working together, we were brutally efficient. Mara had broken the backs of 3 creatures. Seraphina and Oliver had dispatched the rest, their bodies now lying in broken heaps on the canyon floor. We were all breathing heavily, spattered with the creature's black, viscous blood. A new, grudging respect had formed between us, forged in the heat of combat. We had relied on each other, protected each other. Oliver even gave me a nod, a silent acknowledgement of my kill. "They came from a single point," Seraphina said, pointing with her blade towards a dark opening high up on the canyon wall, 100 feet above us. It was a cave, almost perfectly hidden in the shadows. That must be the nest. It was clear what we had to do. The source of our troubles lay within that dark, gaping maw. There was no hesitation. We began to climb, making our way towards the cave that promised to be the heart of Lucian Varick's madness. The echoes in the gorge had fallen silent, replaced by a dreadful anticipation of what we would find within. The cave mouth was a black, jagged wound in the mountainside, a foul, cloying stench, the same one I'd smelled on the Chimera but 100 times stronger, billowed out from its depths, a miasma of rot, chemicals, and shed blood. It was the smell of a place where nature had been perverted and turned inside out. Stepping inside was like stepping into a giant's throat. The narrow entrance quickly opened into a vast network of natural caverns, their ceilings lost in the oppressive darkness above. But this was no natural cave. It had been transformed into a laboratory from the deepest circle of hell. The flickering alchemical light of bubbling beakers and heated alembics cast dancing, monstrous shadows on the walls. Dozens of iron cages lined the cavern, some empty, some holding whimpering, terrified animals, wolves, bears, mountain lions, their eyes wide with terror. Other cages held things that were no longer just animals but half-finished experiments, grotesque amalgams of flesh and bone, moaning in perpetual agony. On massive stone tables lay the grisly tools of Lucian's trade: surgical instruments, leather straps, and vats of strange colored liquids. Scraps of hide, discarded limbs, and piles of bone were strewn across the floor. This wasn't a nest. It was a factory. A production line for nightmares. The Shriekers and the Chimera hadn't been summoned. They had been manufactured here, piece by gruesome piece. By all the gods, Oliver whispered, his usual arrogance replaced by a horrified awe. Seraphina's face was a mask of cold fury, her knuckles white where she gripped her swords. Even Mara, the stoic warrior, looked shaken by the sheer scale of the depravity. We moved deeper, following a wide tunnel that sloped downward. The air grew colder, and a strange, low hum vibrated through the stone floor. We emerged into a central, cathedral-sized cavern, and there we found him. Lucian Varick stood with his back to us, his arms raised before a terrifying spectacle. In the center of the chamber, the very fabric of reality was torn open. It was a hole in the world, a shimmering vertical rift about 20 feet high, pulsing with a nauseating violet light. It didn't emit light so much as swallow it, and looking at it made my head ache and my vision swim. The low hum emanated from this wound in space. Lucien himself was gaunt and pale, dressed in a stained alchemist's robe. His long black hair was matted and wild. He was chanting in a sibilant, ancient tongue, his words weaving into the hum of the rift, creating a dissonant, terrifying harmony. He must have sensed our presence because he stopped his chant and turned, a slow, deliberate movement. A wide, genuinely insane smile spread across his face, a rictus of pure ecstasy. His eyes burned with a feverish, zealous light. "Ah, Seraphina, so lovely of you to come," he said, his voice a dry rasp. "And you've brought guests. How wonderful. Creatures of the moon, no less, come to witness my ascension, my magnum opus. This madness ends now, Lucien," Seraphina snarled, advancing on him. "Madness?" Lucien laughed, a high, unhinged sound that echoed off the cavern walls. "No, my dear. This is clarity. This is revelation. For years I sought to perfect our forms, to remove the weaknesses of our bloodline. But I was looking in the wrong place. The answer was not to change our flesh, but to return to our source." He gestured dramatically at the pulsing violet tear in reality. "I found it by accident. A scar in the world, a place where the veil between dimensions is thin." And I listened. I heard a voice, a great and powerful voice. I established contact with the one who created us all, the primal lord. My blood ran cold. Mara let out a low growl.
You see, you've been living a lie,
Lucien continued, his voice filled with the fervor of a prophet. You believe yourselves to be children of the earth, curses of God or nature. You are fools. Vampires, werewolves. Our kind did not evolve here. We are not of this world. Our ancient ancestors were servants, soldiers in the grand army of the primal lord from a realm of chaos and shadow. They were cowards who fled their sacred duty, escaping through a rift just like this thousands of years ago, hiding in this pathetic, mundane little world. He spread his arms wide, a messianic figure before his unholy altar. I am no coward. I am a loyal son, returning to the fold, and I am bringing you all home with me. The primal lord is weak on this plane, but his children are not. I have crafted him new vessels. He gestured around the cavern. And soon the gates will be wide enough for him to step through in his full glory. The reclamation will begin. He refused to listen to reason, his mind lost in its own glorious, apocalyptic vision. He turned back to the rift and resumed his chanting, his voice rising in a feverish crescendo. The violet light pulsed faster, brighter. The humming intensified into a deafening roar. And from the depths of the shimmering portal, something began to emerge. It was a mass of glistening black tentacles, each as thick as a tree trunk, writhing and coiling into our world. Dozens of unblinking yellow eyes opened on the creature's amorphous, shifting flesh, all of them fixing on us with an ancient alien intelligence. The primal lord was coming through, and Lucien Varick, his mad herald, was holding the door wide open. The cavern was filled with the deafening, mind-shattering hum of the rift. The creature emerging from it was a formless, ever-changing mass of terror, a physical embodiment of a nightmare. Its tentacles lashed out, smashing against the cavern floor and sending shards of rock flying. The stench of ozone and something infinitely older like the dust between stars filled the air.
The rift is the source of his power. We have to close it, Seraphina shouted over the din, her voice sharp and commanding. Oliver, Mara, keep that thing busy. Ethan, with me. We take down Lucien.
There was no time for a plan. We reacted on pure instinct. Mara let out a defining roar and transformed, becoming a 9-foot-tall engine of destruction. She and Oliver, a blur of supernatural speed, charged the monstrosity. Mara met a lashing tentacle head-on, her claws tearing through the glistening black flesh. Oliver zipped around it, too fast to be tracked, his attacks quick and precise, aiming for the unblinking yellow eyes. They were buying us time. Seraphina and I raced towards Lucien, who stood before the rift laughing like a maniac, his body now wreathed in a faint violet aura. As we approached, he simply waved a hand, and a half-dozen shriekers who had been clinging to the cavern ceiling like bats detached and dove at us. Seraphina moved like a whirlwind of silver, her twin blades a beautiful, deadly dance. She decapitated one, sliced the wing off another, her movements economical and precise. A third came at me, talons extended. I didn't have time to fully transform, but I didn't need to. I let the wolf's strength flood my limbs, sidestepped its lunge, and drove my hunting knife into its reptilian head. We fought our way through the guards, step by agonizing step, getting closer to Lucien and the portal. Meanwhile, the fight against the tentacled horror was not going well. For every eye Oliver pierced, 2 more opened. For every gash Mara tore in a tentacle, the flesh would ripple and seal itself. The creature was learning, adapting. It slammed a tentacle into the ground near Mara, the shock wave throwing her against the wall. I saw it happen. The creature had a core, a denser, darker mass deep within its amorphous body where most of the tentacles originated. But it was protected by the writhing forest of its own limbs.
"Its heart," I yelled to Mara, pointing. "There's a core inside it."
I broke off from Serafina and ran, not at the creature but towards the cavern wall. I scrambled up the rock face, the wolf's instincts guiding my hands and feet, until I was 30 feet above the cavern floor. The creature's many eyes tracked Mara and Oliver. It didn't seem to notice me. Taking a deep breath, I launched myself from the wall, aiming for the center of the chaotic mass. I landed on its soft, yielding flesh, my feet sinking into it as if into mud. The creature's body convulsed, but I held my ground. I plunged my knife deep into its core, again and again, stabbing wildly. It let out a psychic scream that was pure agony, a wave of mental force that made my nose bleed and my vision blur. The tentacles flailed wildly, smashing against the ceiling, the floor, each other. One of them caught Oliver, sending him flying into the darkness. Another wrapped around Mara's leg, but she hacked at it with her claws, freeing herself. Then, with a final, shuddering convulsion, the creature began to dissolve, its flesh turning into a black, foul-smelling sludge that melted away to nothing. I stood panting on the now empty cavern floor, but there was no time for relief. At the edge of the rift, Serafina had reached Lucien. They were locked in a deadly duel. Lucien was no swordsman, but the power from the rift flowed around him, allowing him to parry her expert blows with shimmering shields of violet energy. He was too strong, too protected by the portal's raw power.
"You are too late,"
he screamed, blasting Serafina back with a wave of force. "The gate is stabilized. He is coming." Serafina landed on her feet, a trickle of blood at the corner of her mouth. She looked at Lucien, then at the ever-widening rift behind him. A look of terrible final understanding crossed her face. She knew she couldn't beat him while he was tethered to that power source. She couldn't close the gate, but she could still slam it shut. She locked eyes with me for a fraction of a second, and in that moment, I understood. It was a look of sacrifice. With a cry that was equal parts fury and despair, she didn't attack. She lunged. She ignored Lucien's energy shield, taking the full force of it. It threw her back, but she used the momentum, wrapping her arms around the shocked alchemist in an unbreakable embrace. "If you wish to go home so badly, Lucien," she gritted out, "then let me be your escort." Before he could react, she used the last of her strength to push off the edge, dragging them both with her into the shimmering violet abyss. Their screams were cut off instantly. The moment they crossed the threshold, the rift roared and became unstable. The violet light flickered violently, and the portal began to shrink, collapsing in on itself with a sound like tearing reality. "Get out! Now!" Mara, back in her human form, yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the exit. We found Oliver dazed but alive, and the three of us fled through the laboratory of horrors as the cavern behind us began to collapse. We burst out of the cave mouth just as a final deafening implosion shook the mountain to its foundations. Then silence. When we returned to the valley floor, Abner and Julian were there, each with a small army of their kin at their backs. They had felt the seismic shock and had come running. We told them everything, about Lucien, the Primal Lord, the Rift, and about Serafina's sacrifice. A heavy, somber silence fell over the assembled monsters. Using the combined knowledge of their people, Abner and Julian performed a ritual. The werewolves drew on the power of the earth and stone, the vampires on the magic of binding and blood. Together, they wove a powerful spell, and the entire face of the mountain shifted, a landslide of rock and earth sealing the entrance to the gorge forever, creating an impenetrable tomb. Now I stand with Mara on a ridge overlooking the valley, the sealed mountain a silent monument in the distance. I have a new family, a new terrible strength, but my old life, the world of cameras and quiet apartments, is as distant as a star. A fragile peace exists between the wolf and the bat, a treaty sealed in blood and a shared terrible secret. I look up at the full moon hanging in the sky like a skull. It no longer looks beautiful to me. It looks like a cage door. The seal on the mountain is strong, but Lucienne spoke of other scars, other rifts. I have to wonder, how long will the seal hold? And will I ever see the world beyond this valley again? Or is this my life now, a permanent guardian in the valley of the forgotten souls?